for the first quarter of classes. I have not put up the big ad, though I do have that to put up here in a second. And I had not yet mentioned the tripod thing. So
Okay. No
yeah, so
problem.
those are to be done. Though, give it one more minute that we'll get started properly. 30 of us here so far. Welcome, everyone. We're going to have some fun. All right, that down. Cool. Make sure I'm all prepped with everything. Looks kind of like I am. Looks can be deceiving, but it looks like it. All right. How are things out at the stores there, Kurt?
Good.
Glad to
Pretty
hear it.
busy. You
You
know,
know,
gearing up for the weekend with all the vendors will be in Lansdale.
that's going
So,
to be awesome.
mhm.
That's going to be huge. Cool. What do you say, friends? Should we get rolling?
Sure. What time is it?
Um,
6:33.
yeah. If you want to give it a minute, we can give it a minute.
Let's give it like 2 more minutes.
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
Make sure everyone that wants to get on gets on, and then I guess everyone else can get the recorded version if they didn't get on.
Yeah, and that happens. Yeah. Oh, speaking of which, I'll email Kimberly about it, but is there just a separate list for people who signed up for recording only? Because I
There is.
don't.
There was like 65 that signed up for recording, and it
Perfect.
was like 100 for this one, but I know a lot of don't make it. So
Yeah, that
yeah,
happens, right? So
yeah,
I just need to get in touch with Kimberly because I don't have that list yet, but no big
yeah.
deal. And I'll send that out tomorrow
Hmm.
morning.
Okay.
So yeah, no problem. As per usual. Alrighty then.
All right. So what we got? 30 still, or
We're at 30 still at the moment.
all right? Well, I guess we could start.
All right, let me put up that cool. Oops, wrong thing. Sorry, that's my presentation. We'll get to that in a minute. First, this is up here. So, Kurt, did you want to kick us off, my man?
Yeah. So welcome everyone to Joe's class. I think this is an exciting class. Everyone I know likes to shoot holiday photos this time of the year. So we're going to learn how to shoot nice holiday Christmas lights at nighttime. And Joe will teach you how to take some amazing pictures. Just a couple things before he gets started. We have a couple amazing events coming up this weekend, starting tomorrow in Lansdale, our original main location. We have all the vendors coming from Tamron, Canon, Sony, Sigma, Fuji. Peak Design will be here, three-legged tripods. We have some amazing deals. Canon, Sony, Tamron has some crazy in-store specials. You have to come in the store. It's there's not a national rebates, but there's always extra rebates when they do an event. And then we're also paying the sales tax this weekend. So if you want to buy a camera or lens, you can save a lot, even more. So some of the deals are really lower than I've ever seen. Um, and then we're also doing a special on like uh, accessories, 21% off tripods, bags, things like that. So it's a good time to buy. And even small stocking stuffers or accessories for your camera if you don't want to buy necessarily a new camera. We're also doing cash for cameras in Lansdale this weekend too. So if you want to bring in your gear, you can trade it up or just get cash for the holidays. Um, Next weekend we're doing the same event in Howell, New Jersey, and then doing a similar thing in Charlotte next weekend, but it won't be with the reps in Charlotte. But the reps will be in Lansdale tomorrow and Friday, and then in New Jersey next Friday and Saturday. Um, and yeah, and then we have a rep from Tamron on the call here. Tamron's gives us some amazing support. They do amazing trips with us, and they give us amazing bonus rebates. So if you're looking at a lens, this weekend's a good time to buy because there's some extra deals for that. So with that being said, I'll let Joe take over.
Oh, thank you, Kurt. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And yeah, just to kind of go round table, We are very, very fortunate to have Jeff Allen here from Tamron. What would you like to kick off with there, Jeff?
Well, I don't have a lot to add in addition to what Kurt said. As he mentioned, in addition to our national rebates, you definitely want to shop local and visit the Cardinal Camera stores, because we do have additional savings that are available only at the store. Now, if you can't make it to the store, you can call the stores, and they can arrange to get you the rebate that way too. So if you can't make it in, certainly call or hit the website, and they can make sure that you're getting the best possible price anywhere in the U.S. So it's going to be, I think, a great event. Best prices of the year. Almost every Tamron lens you can think of has a national rebate, and many of the lenses also have the rebate that's specific to Cardinal Camera stores. So it's a great time to, if you're looking for new glass for yourself or for a gift, it's just a great time to take advantage. And I think with that, I'll hand it back over to Joe. I've known Joe for many, many years. We worked in the same retail environment in Colorado once upon a time. And so we've known each other a long time. And he's a great instructor. I think you're really going to enjoy his presentation tonight.
Thank you much. Brilliant. Cool.
Jeff, I have Patty here.
Patty made it.
Patty made
Showed
it.
up.
Just showed up.
Hey, Patty.
Hey, how are you, Joe?
I'm so glad to see you again. Cool sweater.
Thank you. It's actually a dress.
Oh, it is? Oh, awesome.
Wow.
It's even better. So cool.
All right.
Oh,
Teach them how to
um,
shoot pictures, Joe.
I'm going to do my best.
All right. See ya.
Cool. All right. We'll get Kurt and Jeff, if you could mute your microphones there. We're going to get rolling. Hey, everybody. Let's see. Make sure we get, cool. So if you've not seen me before, hey, I'm Joe. For about a year and a half now, I have been partnering with and teaching photography classes for Cardinal Camera. I own a business called The F-Stops Here, and everything that we do is photo education. So you may have seen inside of the Cardinal stores the photography cheat sheets. That's my company that makes those. And I've also partnered with Cardinal and with Kurt to bring a lot of classes. So what you're going to see up there in the doobly-doo is the link for the class schedule for the first quarter of the year. There's lots of good stuff in there. I'm working on new classes as well that will roll out throughout 2024. I hope to see you there at those, because we teach everything from studio lighting to composition and everything in between. And so it's a lot of fun. Hope to see you there. Let's just talk about holiday stuff. This is going to be fun. I am planning on kind of chatting for a little bit more than an hour. We have Jeff on with us. So if you have lens questions, there is nobody better that I know than Jeff and Patty. And Jeff's on with us to be able to chat. And I'm happy after I talk to not only answer questions about anything that really is specifically from the presentation, but if you've been in any of my classes before, you know that I'm happy in Q&A to talk about really anything that you've got questions about in photography. So yeah, that's kind of where we're going. Did you want to add something there, Jeff, before I get rolling?
Just one quick thing. Apparently some people are calling and saying they're having a difficult time logging in. But Kurt is going to get email addresses and make sure that they can at least watch the recording. Okay. So
if you would do me a favor there, Jeff. If you would
technology is great.
The only thing I'm able to do is send the links, right? But what I'm happy to do is if he wants to compile some emails to send to me, it's possible there were some typos in email addresses because I just copy and paste that. And so if there's a list of email addresses, I'm happy in about 10 minutes to quickly try to do a quick send of a link. So if you want to communicate that, I will do my best there. But
Okay.
that is what I'm able to do.
Okay.
All right. And then I hope you don't mind, Jeff, that I put you on the spot if people ask questions inside of the chat to answer them if you're able to, because you're an amazing resource. Let's get into it.
They answer questions and save you some time. So I'm already getting some questions, and I'll dive right in, and as soon as I find where I can click on to answer them, I will do that.
Yeah, if you click on the actual question, you're able to reply and answer it directly, which is pretty neat.
Okay.
But it is available for everyone to see, which is cool.
Yeah.
All
great.
right.
Every platform's a little different, so.
Yep.
Now
every time. All right,
now
friends.
I'll shut up.
What we're talking about today, there's actually a technical name for the skill set, because it's actually not a hard skill set to do some of the stuff that you want to do with these shots that we're imagining, right? It's not difficult, but there is actually a name for it, and it's called exposing for highlights. So what we're going to learn at a technical level tonight is a process called exposing for highlights. We're going to do that as a standard shot. And then I'm going to be adding flash to it so you can do a portrait of somebody in front of lights, right? Because that's actually not hard. But it does require knowing just how it works, which is pretty great. That's what we're getting into. Like I was saying, I've already mentioned this, but this way you can visually see them. We make these guys photography cheat sheets. The next version of these, I actually need to add a card for holiday lights because it's actually not in there. That's a missed opportunity on my part, but it covers a bunch of other things. It'll say like, hey, if you're shooting landscape, plug in these settings. It's awesome. Turn it over. There's a 1-paragraph instruction on how to shoot that subject matter. Scan a little QR code. It takes you to a video between 3 and 5 minutes long on some nuance on how to shoot it. Great for yourselves or as a gift. All right, what are we talking about? I want to talk about just a few things. How do we build an exposure that actually works? Because if you've actually tried to shoot a picture of a lights display, it can be problematic. So how do we actually build a shot in the dark? How do we know that it will work? What is this thing that Joe's talking about called exposing for highlights? And then I'm going to add in the problem with trying to do portraiture and the solution to that. And then I'm going to add a fun bonus technique for you, which is understanding how to add a barrel zoom during a light shot in order to create some fun trippy effects. So that's kind of where we're headed. All right, so let's get into the nature of the problem. All right, and the nature of the problem is, of course, that it's dark. And this is something I run into a lot when I'm teaching just night photography generally, right? That a lot of people look at night photography and they think that basically as soon as the sun goes down, photography stops. And that's just patently not true. But we have the difficulty of just working in less light, and we have directional problems. And then we have the problem of actually, if we're shooting pictures of lights, we're exposing for the highlight in the shot. So what does that mean, right? Let's just imagine just a normal photograph, okay? And so to come into this, and we're going to be doing a little bit of back and forth, but let's imagine, this is kind of where we're going, by the way, so that you get excited, like, oh, we're going to learn that stuff. That's going to be great. But let's just imagine just a normal photograph. Okay. So I'm just going to pull up just a normal photograph. Here's a portrait of my son. And I want you to think about the way that this works in our minds, right? We're taking a picture of something, and what do we want? Well, our subject matter is right here. Okay, so that's our subject. Great. If that's our subject, what do we want? We want our subject to be well exposed. Okay. Now, there might be some areas that are darker than our subject, in this case, the fence back here. And there might be some areas that are brighter, right? So like lights in the background, sun, sky, something like that. What we're doing is classically known as exposing for midtones. Exposing for midtones is this thing here, right? That is our subject. I want it to be properly exposed. That doesn't seem like it should be a complicated thing, or even complicated enough that we would have a name for it, right? But let's look at this mechanically, all right? So if I'm going to grab my histogram here, let's think about what we are trying to do. Okay, let's take a look at the skin tone of my subject, which is a little bit on the right side. By the way, let's take a pause. One thing you'll learn about me as you see any classes that I teach is that I'm a big proponent of knowing how to read your histogram. If you do not, we're going to learn that tonight. Okay, don't be scared. It's going to be awesome. This is a photographic histogram right here. You can ignore the color lines, right? That's the RGB histogram that's superimposed. Just ignore that. All I care about is the standard one, what we call the density histogram, right? And it's this area underneath the curve that's the lighter gray. This is it, right? It's actually not a complicated thing. The left side is dark stuff. The right side is bright stuff. That's it. If something touches the left side, it is a pure black pixel. And what we mean by that is not just that it's black. It's that it's so black that there's a loss of information, right? So if I like take my exposure and I shift it, I might make things brighter or darker, but I still see detail, okay? Like I've made my son too bright, but there's detail in his skin, okay? But if you take something that has clipped, that's the term, and I take something that's black and I make it lighter, I'll make it gray, but I'll never pull detail out of it. It's gone. If I have something on the right side of the histogram, that's a pure white pixel. And if I darken it, it might turn gray, but I'll never pull detail out of it. It's gone, right? So that's clipping. And we try, typically speaking, to avoid that under normal circumstances, but that's the left and right side. The height at any point in the histogram is the number of pixels throughout the frame that are at that value. So it doesn't tell you anything about where they are, just that they are. Now, in a lot of editing softwares, if I hover over part of the frame, it gives me a line about where that pixel falls on the histogram. So I know that my son's exposed a little bit bright, but he's got lighter skin tone. Down here, we're about there, we're over there. Okay, so we're seeing that my son, what I care about, is exposed either at center or slightly bright. That matches with his skin tone, so it works. So in other words, we've taken our subject and we have exposed it for midtone, okay? That is not a surprising idea, but it's not always what we want to do, is it? I want you to think about what happens if you're taking pictures of lights and the lights are the subject matter, all right? We have a light source, and typically speaking in a photograph, the light source itself is bright. In other words, I've got mid-tone subject and I've got my light, and it's brighter or to the right of, on the histogram, the subject. If you expose for highlights, now we're making the highlight portion the point of the frame. In other words, the thing I care about, I'm not exposing for mid-tone. The thing I care about, I'm exposing for highlights. That is a different thought process, but it's not actually hard. It's just a different thought process. Let's examine it. Let's come in here to holiday lights. Brilliant. Okay. And actually, that's not the one I really want. Let's come into zoo lights because I got a lot of examples inside of here. Okay, so here I've got a photograph from, I live in Denver, and the Denver Zoo puts on this giant light display every December. It's super cool. I went recently. And let's take a look at what we're doing here. Look at the histogram. Would we expect, if we shot pictures of lights, for it to be that same bell curve distribution that we saw in the last photo? Of course not. We have really black background, and then we've got light sources. What do I want here? And think it through with me. If I am shooting a photograph that is of a light source, what I want is for that light source to be nice and bright. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like a light source, right? What I want is for it to be nice and bright. Pardon? And so I want it to be bright, which is the right side of the histogram, but I want it to just slightly come off of the right wall. Take a look here. Look at what's happening. A spike, and then it comes down and ends. In other words, my highlight, which is actually what I'm photographing for, is just slightly pulled off the right wall. That's how we shoot lighting displays. We take our histogram, and by the way, every camera in the room, I'm going to give you a challenge. Every camera in the room can, at minimum, review photographs with the histogram turned on. Every camera. Most cameras, all of the ones in modern day production, meaning literally this year and last year, right? All modern day cameras can shoot with a histogram turned on, okay? In other words, I can see a histogram on the screen or the viewfinder. Basically, if it's a mirrorless camera, you can shoot with a live histogram. If you have a mirrored camera, you cannot, but you can, with all cameras, review images with a histogram. The histogram is the best information you have about the exposure that you are producing. Straight up. It's the best information. And what we're looking for is to make the image darker, interestingly, until we're no longer clipping that highlight. If you clip the highlight in a shot like this, the actual center of the bulb starts to actually get overexposed and it flares out and you're losing detail. And that's not nearly as good to look at. Now, some areas of this get a little bit darker, and so I have other values, but what I'm really paying attention to is the way that this histogram is operating right in there. Okay, so I've got a spike on my highlights and it trails off, and I kind of wanted to just hit right into the corner. Okay, now Kim's asking about tripods, and do not worry, Kim, we are going to talk about tripods here in a second, 100%. I'm just not there yet, but short answer is absolutely, absolutely. So this is what we are going to try to produce, and I want to walk through some thought process on it. Okay, but that is our goal. Now, come back. We're going to be going back and forth to there as we go through tonight. But coming back here, let's think about when we're actually, oops. Oh, Jeff, I think you're scrolling through that on accident there. Okay, because you have control over it as well. All right, come back here. All right, so let's actually jump straight into Kim's question, because I think it's a fantastic one. Hey, are you shooting with a tripod? There is a reason that I asked Kurt before class if there were any specials on tripods, because I wanted to make sure I talked about them. Because if you want to reproduce what we're talking about tonight, and it's not hard, it's easy to follow, simple directions, you will be able to reproduce this. The only trick is, yeah, you have to have a tripod, okay? And I want to walk through that with you, because doing so will allow you to really understand exactly how this operates, right? Let's think through the process of building the exposure, okay? And as we get into it, I'm going to tell you, you're going to easily get your best results by shooting in fully manual exposure mode. That's M on the dial. By the way, you can autofocus these shots just fine. I have never failed to autofocus a lights display. It's never failed. The reason is we're shooting pictures of the highlight source, and that is enough light for the autofocus system to work. It's if we're trying to shoot a photograph of something that's dark, but the lights are actually well lit. So autofocus works, but it does need to be manual exposure. Let's walk through why. So this is a shot that I did not too long ago. Interestingly, this is shot with a Tamron lens. It's the same lens I'm using to record this right now, which is the Tamron 28-75 f2.8, which is a marvelous lens. It's awesome. So anyway, little thing for you there. I love it. I've owned it for a while, and I use it for all of my teaching and for this one. So it's a 28. It says 76. That's a typo on my part. Oops. It's the 28-75. I did not get an extra millimeter for being nice. 42 millimeter. So let us say that I wanted to shoot a photograph, but I need to hand hold it. All of a sudden, hand holding the image is the most important thing, right? Because otherwise I get a whole bunch of motion blur, right? Like this. So here is me saying, okay, let's build this shot, but I need it to be ISO 100 because ISO 100 is my best image quality. Well, at night, that's going to tank your shutter speed. Now, I know that I'm off by about a little bit more than a stop because it's f4.5. I could have shot it at f2.8, but that wouldn't have really saved me, right? That would have brought me to a 1/6 or an 1/8 of a second, right? and we're going to get significant motion blur. So let's look at the interaction. Even with an f2.8 lens, if I go out to shoot photographs, and I try to shoot at ISO 100 and I don't have a tripod, the most important thing is that the image is hand holdable like it is here. Well, to do that, you'll notice I had to go to about a 60th of a second. Your mileage might vary a little bit, and that's going to put me at ISO 2000 roundabout. Your mileage might vary a little bit, but that is going to be really problematic, right? It's going to be really problematic because I'm going to increase my ISO, my image quality is going to degrade. Well, let's think through the situation from the point of view of shutter speed when we're just shooting a standard shot. All right, let's think it through. First of all, let's look at motion blur. Motion blur, there are two types, okay? Two types of motion blur. The first one is what happens if the subject is moving. We call this subject blur. And it's what if the subject is moving faster than the shutter speed can accommodate for? Well, you get subject blur. Subject blur is always something you'll recognize because one thing in the frame will blur more than the rest of the frame. Okay, and we've all seen motion blur, right? All the time, no problem. You can solve subject blur by one of only two things. Have the subject move less, which is really not going to happen, or shoot at a faster shutter speed. Okay, the second type of blur is camera blur, where the camera is moving and the shutter speed cannot accommodate for that. Pardon me. In that instance, there are actually a couple things that you can do. The first one is you could have a faster shutter speed. All right. Interesting. Sorry, I'm also looking at the emails from people having trouble getting in. I'm going to have to do that in a second. So if we have the camera moving, you can have either the camera move less or you can shoot at a faster shutter speed. In other words, shutter speed is always able to affect blur. It is always an approach to solve the problem, 100%. Okay. But with camera blur, just having the camera move less is the other. So let's imagine we are shooting that classic shot. We're going to take a look at shooting outside, doing a display. So in this kind of a situation, all right, is the subject going to move? And the answer is no. If the subject is not moving, the only type of blur possible is camera blur. If we have a tripod, there is no possibility of camera blur. If the subject doesn't move and we have a tripod, there's no possibility of blur. Therefore, shutter speed is irrelevant. I'll say that again because it's a really important point about night photography. If the subject doesn't move and the camera doesn't move, shutter speed is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Right? Now, if you're asking questions like, what if the lighting display changes? Well, that's a movement. Now shutter speed matters again, right? But if the display in front of us does not move, and the camera doesn't move, then shutter speed is irrelevant. At that point, you can shoot any shutter speed you want. So let's look at the way that we build these images. And I'm going to show you this one here, and then I'm going to take a second, and I'm going to send links from, looks like for some folks seeming to have problems. So if you'll give me the grace to send that real fast. But let's look at this first. So manual exposure, boom. We set ourselves down. The first thing you're going to do is your native ISO. Now I say native because native ISO is the actual sensitivity of your sensor. For the vast majority of cameras, this is ISO 100. But some cameras, it's 64. Nikon Z7 II, it's 64. Nikon D850, it's 64. Some cameras, it is 125. There's some Fuji cameras that do that. And for some cameras, it's 200. So like the Panasonic and OM cameras, the native ISO is 200. So your first thing is going to be setting your ISO at your native value. That's your best image quality. You're going to see it be 100 on probably all of my images, because I believe all of the cameras I have owned in the last several years, The native ISO has been 100, but native is actually the thing you care about, okay? Then we're going to set aperture second. There are some images where you're going to shoot something up close and you're going to have some lights in the background and you want them to blur a bunch. Nancy, native ISO for your camera, that's a great question. Let's do a little thing here real fast. So when you're looking at your ISO value, right, you're going to see numbers like 100, 200, 400, etc., right? If you see a bracket, right, like my camera's a bracket 80 and a bracket 64, okay? These are not native. Those are called a pull. The idea behind a pull is I'm actually shooting at ISO 100, but then I'm going to go in and artificially darken the image. So why don't we use them? It's technically processing the image in camera. And if we process in camera, it is not as clean. So literally on my camera that does an 80 pull and a 64 pull, 80 is not as clean of ISO as 100. So you want the lowest value that looks normal like that. That's the answer. All right. So great question. So we're going to do native ISO. Then we're going to set our aperture. For some cameras, we're going to do like an f2.8 because we're going to focus on something up close and try to get really, really blur lights behind us. That's awesome. Most of the time, you're going to notice that I'm shooting this at f11. So this is f11 for 8 seconds. Okay. That is because I wanted tons of depth of field. This is the city county building here in Denver, and they do this big lights display every year, and this is the way they did it. All right, so I wanted tons of depth of field. If you zoom into this picture, there's detail all through the building and the clock tower, etc. Tons of it because it's f11. So I usually am doing between f8 and f11 for my images, doing this, except if I want really blurred background. Now, if everyone will give me just a second, I'm going to send a couple links here. If you have got any questions you want us to make sure we're answering, good time to pop them into the chat. And I thank you for your patience. I just want to get as many, send some of these through to folks. Copy. This is for an attendee. All right. There's one. Copy address. There's 2. And I thank everybody for your patience. Never received the link for the class. Interesting. And finished adding contacts, email template, and invite. Cool. That is everything I am able to do, and I thank you for your patience. Okay, so then we talk shutter speed. So I've just given you your exposure mode, manual, your ISO, your native, and then your aperture. It's probably going to be f8 to f11. So I've given you most of the puzzle. Now all you're going to do is take your shutter speed and go longer, longer, longer until your histogram looks correct. That's it. And we already know what that looks like. There's a spike for the lights that's coming off of the right wall that dead ends right in that corner. That's your shot. Shoot it at that value. You're guaranteeing not to clip your highlights, and that's exactly what we want. Now, you might ask here, what will my metering system tell me? And doesn't this work in aperture priority or shutter priority or something like that? And let's talk about it. The reason that this just does not work appropriately in a non-manual mode is because of something called the 18% gray problem. Okay, here is the 18% gray problem in a nutshell. Let's say that you're a camera manufacturer and you are going to try to program cameras to be able in aperture priority or program or auto mode. You're going to teach cameras what a proper exposure is in all circumstances. If that seems like an impossible task to you, That's because it is. There are just too many varieties of images. The picture we're looking at here is substantively different than the portrait we looked at a second ago. They're totally different. How can one rule actually inform both? It can't. So the best thing we've ever come up with is called the 18% gray rule. All right, here's how it works. Pop over here and bam. All right, here's how it works. This is 18% gray right there. Your camera defines a proper exposure as one where the pixels all average together to 18% gray. That's what it is, all right? It averages to 18% gray. Now, let's take a look over here. Does this average to 18% gray? And the answer is no, right? There's this really dark sky back there, all right? That's going to drag the overall exposure down. If we take a look at the histogram from Holiday Lights shots, right? The histogram is shifted way, way, way to the left. The camera believes it's wildly underexposed. And this is why, if you've tried to do this in aperture priority or program mode or something like that, and your images have turned out overexposed, too bright, the reason is it's trying to compensate for the black in the sky. It's trying to take that black and turn it into neutral gray by averaging it, right? Now, if you shoot center weighted, it's only going to do this for like the subsection or spot metering. That's just telling the camera what area should average to 18% gray. And that can get you some of the way there. But the reality is metering systems just can't handle this. And so 18% gray is going to throw off the camera, all right? So we pretty much ignore the camera's metering system, all right? We're going to set ourselves up, native ISO, stop down aperture, and we're going to go longer in our exposure to make sure we get everything. But we're going to stop when the histogram looks like this. So see how I've got that spike? It comes up the right side, it comes down, it dead ends right in the corner. That's your shot, all right? Everything else is really just small fine touching, but this is the image out of camera. This is a non-edited image. So you can just get the lights to come out nice and bright and crisp right away. That's how it works. All right. Now, what if we don't just want the image, all right? What if we want a portrait? And to suffer for my art, I am the subject in this particular series. So Stefan asked an interesting question. How does cropping an image change its histogram? A histogram only references the area that is being shown. And so I don't think that that will actually affect the way that you shoot at all. But if you take a look at a histogram while you're working in photo editing, you will see the histogram shift and alter because it's only analyzing the data that's actually being currently viewed. Okay, so yes, histograms will change as you look at different subsections of the image, and that is true in camera as well, which is pretty cool. So Larry asks, what metering mode do I suggest? It doesn't matter. We are bypassing the metering mode. We're ignoring it completely. Whatever you do, the camera's going to say you're wrong, so it doesn't matter. Just ignore it. That is the actual answer. Okay, so let's imagine shooting the portrait shot. All right, how do we do this? And this is a completely possible thing to do. It's just a little bit of thought process. So here's attempting to get the image. And you might say, okay, I get how to do that. Tripod, ISO 100, f8 to f11, and then alter shutter speed until the highlight comes off the right wall of the histogram. I'm done. That's a good shot. That'll work. But if I have a person, people have motion blur issues. So I can't shoot a picture of a person for 8 seconds. All of a sudden, I'm back into this position, 60th of a second, ISO 2000, f2.8, in order to get the image without motion blur, which of course is really, really noisy, loss of incredible detail. It doesn't work. All right, how do we do this shot? And the answer is you have to think of the subject and the background as completely different exposures. All right. You must think of them as separate images. All right. I refer to this as the two triangle thought process. But what happens is we have our lights, and that is one exposure. And then you have the subject, and that is a completely separate exposure. Okay. Which means we light the subject, and that is with a flash. And now I'm going to tell you how we do that. Okay. So we have to think of the person and the background as separate exposures. So here's what we're going to do. And I want to walk through the thought process here and show you, and then talk about why this works. Okay. So notice the exposure, ISO 100, quarter second, f2.8. That is the way we build the exposure for the background, as we have already discussed. That's how it's done. Okay. But then it's ISO 100 without motion blur. And I look a lot better in this one because I'm being lit by the flash, right? So the actual quality of light on my face is really poor. But if I had brightened this shot, I could have only done it by raising ISO or slowing down the shutter speed, and that would have overexposed the lights. That doesn't work. So instead, build the lights for the background the way that you want. Then we add flash on top. Remember, we are in fully manual camera mode, but I'm actually leaving the flash in what's called TTL. TTL stands for through the lens, and it is the flash term for auto. That's what it is. So the flash is automated by the metering system. The camera is in manual. So I actually want to take a second and come back to Larry's question. Larry said, hey, what metering mode do you suggest? And I said, for the images that we had already seen, right? So these scenes of like just lighting displays, it doesn't matter. It truly doesn't. For this, though, it does. I want it to be in center weighted for this. Why? The reason's pretty simple. The camera is setting the exposure for the background in manual. It's not going to shift or alter. Aperture, shutter, ISO, I dictate. But the metering mode is always still running, right? It just, in manual mode, it doesn't have permission to do anything, okay? But if I put a TTL flash on board, the metering system all of a sudden has a job. It can dictate how the flash behaves. Pardon me, sorry. Dry cough. Hopefully some tea will help that. So the metering mode is still running, but if the camera's in manual and a flash is in TTL, the only thing the metering mode can do is drive the flash. The flash is lighting the subject. Well, where's the subject? Middle of the frame. It's a portrait. So you put the metering mode into center weighted. Once you do that, the flash fires. It's going to light your subject. Now, flashes get dimmer on subjects the farther away they are. And Nancy, yeah, you can actually, with this one, put the flash on board and point it straight at the subject. You don't have to do anything tricky. Nothing at all. Point it straight at them. It's fine. We're outside, and there's a little bit of a shadow that you can see behind me on the ground. Whatever. And if you angle the camera upwards, you won't even see that. Sorry. So, the flash is going to fire. It's going to light me. And the fact that the camera's got the flash in auto is going to actually control the exposure. So I look pretty good. Great. And I can do it in 100 ISO. So my image quality is way better. Way, way, way better. So Kathleen's asking, can you use the in-camera flash? And the answer is maybe. They are very, very low powered. So this was with the actual auxiliary flash. And so what will happen is set your camera in manual. And then if you use an onboard flash and your subject is too dark, the flash is firing at max power and it's just not bright enough. So the answer is a very strained maybe. I'm not sure if there are any specials that Cardinal has on like the Godox 860 flash. It's an onboard flash, but it's a pretty inexpensive onboard flash. Highly recommended. I don't work for Godox, by the way. That's the product system that I use. And that would be I think the thing that would make this definitively work. So I could pop it into the chat later if people want to know. But anyway, Maybe. It depends on how close you are with an onboard flash. Because they're pretty dim, you've got to be at pretty close working distance, but it is possible. So you have to do some trial and error, but it could potentially be done. All right, I'm back here. So you might be asking the question, and I think it's a very good question. Wait a minute. It still is a picture of a person. It still is a picture of a person at a quarter of a second. Why is there no motion blur? There's motion blur here, right? Well, obviously this was being handheld, but we know with a tripod there wouldn't be motion blur of the background. But why am I not motion blurred? What's going on? The answer is pretty cool, and it's something that's called the flash duration and the effective shutter speed. You're gonna like this. Okay. Shutter speed, pretty simple concept. Shutter mechanism opens, shutter mechanism close. We measure the period of time in between. Groovy. If it's silent shooting, it's the scan of the sensor, obviously, but you get the idea. So shutter speed is the period of time a shutter mechanism is open. Effective shutter speed is the period of time that light hits the sensor. Now that might sound like literally the same thing, and it usually is, but not always, because flashes have what's called the flash duration. That is the period of time during which the flash actually generates light, okay? Because it's not a bulb, it's actually a wire, and it lights up really fast. A flash, generally speaking, creates light for about a 1/16,000th of a second. Different flashes, different strobes can be actually shorter than that. Generally speaking, the more powerful a flash or strobe is, the shorter its duration. But we can run 1/16,000th of a second as a basic primer for understanding flash. So if I am producing flash for a 1/16,000th of a second, right? That is the period of time that light is hitting my subject. Now, I'm standing in front of the lights, meaning the lights that are behind me aren't lighting me, right? So the period of time that light actually hits me is the flash duration, not the total shutter speed. Is it possible that I will motion blur if the actual length of time I'm being exposed is a 1/16,000th of a second? No, of course not, right? Absolutely not. The effective shutter speed on me is a 1/16,000th of a second, meaning I can have the image here, I can shoot pictures of people, and they will be nice and crisp, no problem, particularly if they are in front of the lighting display. No problem at all. It works great. All right. So we set the initial manual exposure for the background as if it were not a portrait. Then we're going to use a flash. I have set it to complete auto. This is camera in manual. The flash is in total auto mode. That is how this image was shot. And we can be in front of displays at parks, in front of the house. We can be at, this is just some trees near the, in this kind of common space near my house here. Any space like that, use the flash to light the people. Leave it in TTL, you're in good shape. And be in center weighted metering, and then you're going to get an appropriate amount of light. That's it. That's how it's done. By the way, if that idea of that effective shutter speed sounds pretty cool to you, and you've wondered, hey, how do they get those images of like bullets going through watermelons and strawberries dropping into bowls? That's why it works. So this is an image. This, by the way, fun story. This image was shot in this room, black background, flashes set up there and there. To this day, right there on the ground, you can't see it from the camera point of view. Right there on the ground, there's a giant green stain on my carpeting from shooting this picture. Fun fact, because that is food coloring, then this room is carpeted. But that's how this image works. It's how we can get droplets of water. That's how we can get bullets going into watermelons. It's because of the flash duration. The shutter speed is actually irrelevant to the conversation. Another interesting point. All right, so that's how portraits work. Pretty simple concept, right? But it teaches you some fun things about how flash works. And building exposure in manual is a really useful technique. By the way, little technique for you here. Build, if you're doing the portrait, build the background exposure with the flash turned off so that you actually build it the way you want. Then just turn the flash on. Easiest way to do it. All right. Let's add a little bonus, and that is this fun technique, zooming. So one reason, if you're doing a fun display, that you're going to want to make sure you hit 1 to 2 seconds at least is because of this. And that is, I'm shooting the display and I actually focus beforehand, start shooting the picture, and then take the barrel of the lens and zoom. All right. And you get to do fun stuff like this. The only trick is this doesn't work at f2.8. At 2.8, you're probably going to shoot at ISO 100 at about, depending on where you are, a quarter of a second to a 30th of a second. All right. And as a result, you won't be able to do as long of a barrel pull. Okay. Because we want to be slow and smooth. Instead, we want to stop down to like f8, f11, and then just start zooming as we go. 1 second and longer is great. Okay. And that is how we're going to switch over to demonstration mode for our last little bit, because I'm going to show you bonus material. I didn't advertise this, but I wanted to also show you fast tip for how to edit these photos as well. Kim asked, zooming in or zooming out? Honestly, it produces slightly different effects. So I would try both, but generally speaking, I like to zoom out. That's because, I don't know, it works well for me, but I would try both. No reason why not. So this is a zooming shot right here. And this is, I went to f8, as you can see right there, in order to hit 2 second exposure time. That's how that's done. All right. So I want to come to this. This is obviously the exact same thing. All right. And this is out of camera. There is no change. And that's a question there for Jeff on recommended telephoto lens for Sony APS-C. There, I'm sure I've got some ideas, but there's some really good ones. So how would we edit this? I want to show you that editing one of these shots, and we're going to look at ones that are not portraits, because portraiture, there's only one additional step. It's really not hard. I'll just mention it. Mary, thank you much. I appreciate you. Portraits, one extra step, and I'll just mention that. But here's the idea. What do I really want to do? I want to make these lights nice and poppy. I want them to be nice and saturated. But one thing I really care about is, I really care about this background. I can see too much of like that structure right there. I can see too much of the ground, too much of what's behind there. I don't care about that. I want the lights to really pop. How are we going to do it? You're seeing me do this in Capture One, but this can be done in Lightroom. This can be done in Photoshop. It's not hard to do, but here's the technique. All right. We want to mask for luma range. Okay. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to build a mask that is initially for everything. So this is a what's called a filled mask. And then I'm going to adjust the range. And I want 2 of these. I want one that is for dark stuff. So I'm going to take out all highlights from it. I'm starting to get the ground. So we're going to stop there. All right. So this, rename, we're going to call dark. I'm going to make a new one, filled adjustment layer. And you probably see where this is going. I want to get rid of all the dark areas. And I want something that rename we're going to call bright. Now, what are we going to do here? Check this out. Come to the dark mask. I'm just going to pull down the exposure. And see how that pushes the lights forward, right? Before and after. Before, after. See how it just pushes those forward, right? Really makes them prominent, okay? Now I'm going to come to bright, And if I thought that I had any room to kind of brighten these, I certainly could. One thing, if some of the highlight areas were actually starting to clip, you could take like your highlight slider and pull it down, but I might pull up a little bit of dehaze and up a little bit of saturation, and I might be done, right? That's going to push that display forward. That's your trick. We're going to take anything not the lights, and we're going to just darken those areas. And making masks based off of luma range is the way that we do it. Okay, if you have a portrait, the only extra step is to make a mask of the subject, of the people, and leave them out of any area that is being darkened or really brightened. You want them to be their own separate thing. That's it, really simple. One more time so that you see me doing it. We'll do it with a different image. This is one of my favorites from that shoot. This is reset. This is out of camera. Already I like it, right? Just so you can see it again, we need 2 filled adjustment layers, right? The first one is going to be dark stuff. Just bring and take out any brighter areas until I start to think, oh, I'm just getting background. I'm going to bring that and I'm going to apply that. Okay, so that one, rename dark. Do one more, add a filled adjustment layer. Luma range on bright stuff. We're just going to get rid of dark areas. Make sure that bright areas are still in it. We're going to apply, right click, rename as bright. This is the exact same trick. There's nothing new here. Take that, darken that background to really push those lights forward. All right. I might brighten this area just slightly, I think, because I think that's nice. And add a little bit of saturation. And there we go. Doesn't need to be more complicated than that. And you get this wonderful, rich display. By the way, we had kind of mentioned shooting up close at like f2.8, which is what this one is here. So this is focus on foreground in order to get really nice and blurred background. And that's the beauty of f2.8. Okay, with that, that hits right about at an hour of lecture time, which is what I was aiming for, was an hour to be able to do our discussion. And I'm going to come in to Q&A to answer any questions you have about not just this, but we'll answer questions about related matter here first, and of course lenses, because we're fortunate enough to have Jeff with us. And then if there's other stuff people want to chat about, I'm here to chat with you 100%. Let me come in here and I'll pop back up there. That's the exact same link that goes to the classes from before there. All right. Kim, I do not sadly have any notes. I apologize for that. All right. So questions that we've got. Andre asks, if you're shooting Christmas lights and they usually get blown out, do you stop down entirely so the histogram highlights are not blown out? It shouldn't be too much, but I'm going to, I don't like to stop down past F11 because you start incurring diffraction, okay? Stop at F11 roundabouts. Now, Jeff might actually say, hey, there's a couple Tamron lenses where we're not seeing any diffraction concerns till F16 because they're awesome. I expect probably the 35 to 150 is probably like that. That would be my expectation. But generally, if I don't know your lens, I'll say stop at F11. I'm going to control histogram through shutter speed at that point. So, pardon me, what I'm going to do is take shutter speed. I'm going to manage it brighter and darker until I take that highlight right off of the right wall. That's my shot. Before I start answering any other questions, Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to add before I jump into some Q&A stuff?
Well, no, I think you nailed it. The 35 to 150 is pretty much diffraction free throughout the range of apertures. The engineers put every possible technology into it to make it the sharpest lens on the market, and it wins award after award for optical excellence. And that's something that you look at aftermarket lenses or third-party lenses, if you will. I don't know who the second party is, but Tamron is a huge lens manufacturer. We own more patents on optical technology than the rest of the industry combined. They actually, in many cases, come to us for patented technologies that we've developed, and we have huge amongst our actual manufacturing. We build 7 to 10 million lenses and assemblies a month. Now that's everything from we still build a few cell phone lenses, although that market has pretty much gone offshore from Japan, and everything from cell phone lenses to broadcast television lenses to medical instruments to a lot of things that you see the Tamron name on the shelf in the camera store that you might not think of us for optics, but we're a huge and very diverse optical company, and they pulled no stops in or they pulled all the stops, I should say, in developing the 35 to 150, and it's available in both Sony mount and now in Nikon mount too. We've been licensed by Nikon. They've opened it up, and we're starting to introduce more and more lenses in the Nikon mount. So that's a big plus for us. We also have a number of lenses for Fuji X mount, and we still have a number of very fine lenses. If you're a DSLR shooter, no reason not to come to Tamron for that too. We have a number of DSLR lenses still available that are in production and current. So that's that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Brilliant. I want that 35 to 150 so bad. Oh my God. Okay. So, you're answering that one. Cool. Let's see. I think some people have questions about the 20 to 200, but Anthony asks, would my Canon 24 to 105 be a good lens for taking house pictures? It'd be great. 24 to 105 works awesome. You'll notice that very few images. I showed you one image tonight that I actually really went to, maybe two images that went to a bright aperture, right? To get really large out of focus background details. Most of the light shots that I did were f8 to f11. So an f4 lens is great. 24 to 105, I think would do just really good stuff admirably across all kinds of things. The only thing is it won't blur background as much in either a portraiture, if you're going for that, or that foreground object, lights are blurred in the background effect. It won't be as blurred, whatever. And actually, I would say with portraiture, when we're doing these kind of shots, if it's somebody standing in front of a display, typically speaking, we actually want to see the display really well, right? Because that's part of the showpiece. So we actually want that to be more stopped down. So I don't think you need really bright apertures for this style of shooting almost at all. They're nice to have for other things, but I don't think you need to go brighter than f4. I think you're good. And you'll notice I didn't feel a need to use telephoto for this style of shooting. For other stuff, absolutely, but not for this one nearly as much. So we've got a question.
Pardon me. Looks like we have a couple of Tamron questions here.
Take it, my man.
All right. The Tamron 28 to 200, does that work for portraits? Yes, it does. I did a webinar. I teach on Tamron's behalf all year round too, and I did a webinar a couple of years ago during the pandemic when we really couldn't have in-person seminars, and I went to a car show with the 28 to 200, and I shot an entire car show, wide, normal, telephoto, all with that one lens. But again, in that portrait range, in that roughly 60 to 150 millimeter or so range, it is super sharp and does a very nice job. So if you have that, don't be afraid to shoot portraits with it. Again, you can shoot fairly wide with it. It is a variable aperture lens. It goes from 2.8 at the wide end to I think 5.6 at the tele. I haven't picked it up lately. Let me look here. Yeah, 5.6. And so if you're at 200, you'll be at 5.6, but also depth of field diminishes as you increase your telephoto magnification. So you can still have a pretty soft background, even if you have to crank it all the way out. but in that, that typical 60, 70, 80 to 135, maybe 150 range, it does a fantastic job for portraits, and I would recommend it. If you haven't tried it before, definitely give it a look. The other elephant in the room, we get this question all the time: will Tamron have any Canon RF compatible lenses? Ask them. Seriously, you'll notice I mentioned a few moments ago that we have Nikon lenses because Nikon has licensed us. We're not going to go and reverse engineer the Canon mount. Somebody tried that a couple of years ago, and Canon's lawyers very quickly made them quit doing that. So until Canon decides that they're ready to license independent, again, that third party term comes up, independent lens manufacturers, who knows? I would suspect sooner than later, but I've been saying that for 3 years now, so who knows?
Fair point. Cool. All right. Cool. What other questions do folks have for us? I'm at your disposal. Anything I can answer that's been bugging you about your photography, if I can be of service, that's what I am here for. And while I'm waiting to see what questions people have, I put the link back up for classes coming up with Cardinal. I think I'm doing a couple photo 101s, some portraits, some landscapes, some macro, some composition, all your greatest hits. So I look forward to being back. My classes are 2 hours. And just like with this one, they are recorded, and recordings are available in perpetuity. I never take them down, so you have access to that forever. So that's what those look like. There should be like signs and stuff inside of Cardinal. They're on there. That way you know. Cool. Awesome. Nancy will see me in the composition. That'd be cool. Anthony asks another question, but not with lighting. What would be a great lens for doing macro? What system are you using, Anthony? So that we can answer that. And thank you, Larry. Happy holidays to you as well. Looking forward to seeing you in 2024. Michelle's going to ask, would you recommend using APS-C camera or a full frame camera? Which is actually a very interesting question. While I'm waiting to see, unless Anthony answered what his system was. Oh, he shoots Canon. Okay, so let's do that one. Anthony is shooting Canon. Are you shooting the RF system or the EF system?
And just quickly, while we're waiting for the answer there, and I know you got it, but you've got these. You might want to throw up the slide again for the sale events.
Yeah. Let me
this weekend and next weekend. But don't go into the store and beat up the Canon rep at the counter asking them when they're going to introduce or when they're going to license Tamron, because those poor folks get beat up with that question all the time. They don't know. That's the factory in Japan's decision to make, not some poor sales rep or tech rep behind the counter. They don't know any more than we know when it's going to happen. So
yeah,
please don't beat them up. But again, we hope sooner than later.
Yeah. Jeff and I know a lot of the Canon reps, and they're such nice folks. You should get a chance to, if you're a Canon shooter, you should get to know your Canon rep as well. There's some wonderful folks out there to know. Okay. So Anthony's asking, hey, where's some good RF macro? The sad thing is there's just not a lot of options. There's really the 100mm macro, that's RF, and that's about it. Unless you are adapting, right? So adapting wise, if you've got the RF to EF converter and you can find, and it's hard to find a Tamron 90 because they are sadly out of production, but it was a spectacular lens. And I would use it adapted and have used it adapted on an RF body. I would do that any day of the week. It's a fantastic thing, but you have to find it used because it is sadly out of production, and it was a great lens. Native to the system, there's only the one, and it is the 100 millimeter. Now, people who are like, hey, wait a minute, I know the RF system. Joe's forgot something. You forgot about the 85 millimeter. And the 35 millimeter, both of which say macro on them. And I'll tell you how I speak and discuss, which is different. Most of the optical world calls things a macro lens if it can produce what's called a 1-to-1 magnification, that something appears up 100% size on sensor. Canon defines internally and on their boxes anything as a macro lens if it does 1-to-2 or better, which means you actually see more macro lenses from Canon, but they are not all the same. The 85 and the 35 do 1-to-2 reproduction, which is not that really up close reproduction, though they are good and they cost way less money than a 100 millimeter. The one that does a full 100% magnification is the 100 millimeter. And it's a great lens. It is expensive, but it is phenomenal. A great alternative if you can adapt the Tamron 90. I have done that. It sings. So those are some thoughts. Okay. Michelle asks, what
another thought.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, another thought. If you're into the RF system or really any system, and you don't have a macro lens and you want to get close up or life size, or maybe even better than life size, if you have a good lens to start with, a lens that's sharp and high contrast, extension tubes are a very inexpensive way of getting close up. They go between the camera body and the lens. They're hollow tubes, but they, in most cases, have the contacts to couple to the meter. You might give up autofocus, but when you're working very, very close, you pretty much need to turn autofocus off anyway, or the camera sensor is just going to make the lens hunt like crazy. But extension tubes, probably, depending upon the camera you need to fit to, probably are like in the $100 to $150 range, pretty inexpensive. And again, if you put it on a sharp lens to begin with, you're going to get sharp results. Maybe not quite as good as a true purpose-built macro lens, but it's a great way to dip your toe in the water.
Yeah. And I believe ProMaster has extension tubes for RF, if I'm remembering correctly. So Cardinal Camera would have them.
Yeah. Right.
All right. So Michelle asked, would you recommend using APS-C or full frame? I mean, the benefits of APS-C are that there's a couple of them. The first is that it's just less expensive to get into the APS-C world. And I would rather see people taking pictures than not taking pictures. It's as simple as that, right? More people getting into the hobby and shooting is always more better. And people who are waiting to get into photography until they've saved up budget for a full frame, I just think that's sad because you can produce exceptional stuff APS-C. The other thing about APS-C is that lenses that are built for APS-C are smaller, lighter, cheaper than ones made for full frame, right? So you have a smaller and simpler kit. So there's a lot of benefit in the APS-C world that I think people forget about. And everyone talks about full frame because full frame absolutely does do better low light performance and color rendition. And the way that camera manufacturers are working, they're building way more stuff in full frame because it's a more profitable market segment. So that means, sadly, there aren't as many really good options in APS-C as there should be. Fortunately, Sony has a number. They're supporting APS-C really well. There is the Z50 from, there's a couple APS-C from Nikon, a couple of them from Canon that have been coming out, which is great to see. We're seeing a lot of APS-C lens support from Sony and from Tamron for Sony. A little bit less, but a reasonable amount for Nikon. And we're just starting to see Canon dip their toes into that market. And that means it's growing, which is good. Full frame is larger. It's gonna cost you more, but it is better low light performance and it is better color rendition. If that is the key thing for you, as it personally is for me, that's a good way to go. But it seems like, Jeff, you've got something you want to add on to that too. Yes?
Yeah, Fujifilm, they're going to be at the sale this weekend too. Fujifilm has built an entire ecosystem around APS-C, and Tamron coincidentally makes several fantastic lenses to fit the Fujifilm. So that's another alternative. And again, their ecosystem is built around that sensor size, and they do a really fine job. I shoot the Fuji, one of the XT series cameras, and just a remarkable job. So don't rule them out either.
I thank you for reminding me about that. That's totally just a mind blank on my point, because since Fuji builds their ecosystem around APS-C, I would argue they have more high quality lens options for APS-C than any other system in the world. Because that's all that they are, and there are some exceptional ones. So very much worth your consideration. In the end, whatever gets you shooting is important, is what I would say. John asks, thoughts on good tripods? Tired of my light duty tripod. You know what? There is no greater, like the physical experience of shooting with a tripod that you just like and trust is, I think, totally paradigm shifting for photographers. I keep a little desk next to me when I teach. Which is a small desk that's on a tripod. I'm gonna take that off because I'll show you what I use. I keep this so that I have, if I need any extra pieces with me while I'm teaching, I have it. This is the tripod I use for all the pictures you saw tonight and everything that I've shot since 2017. This is a ProMaster Specialist, and it's nice thick legs. It's solid, it's sturdy. It doesn't have to be crazy heavy, but I really like something that feels nice and solid, right? So this is what I use. Three-legged thing. I have been wanting one of the Bucky series from them for a while because it's so good. There's some amazing three-legged thing tripods. You want something that just feels solid. But the other thing I'll mention is the thing that's going to do more than anything else for you is not using the center column. The wobbliest part of any tripod is having the center column that has one choke point as opposed to 3 points of connection from the legs. So you want a tripod tall enough that you use it at its full height without the center column. That means some tripods are just not tall enough. Specialist is tall enough. You're going to find some other ones that are definitely tall enough. Bucky, I tested it out. I'm 6'1". Bucky is tall enough, and several other ones from Three-Legged Thing are tall enough. And so there's several of them out there. But what's going to make you feel really good about your tripod is a big, thick head on it, right? Small ball heads. Remember, the amount of tension a ball head has is related to the surface area that it grabs. Small ball heads have a small surface area. Therefore, you get that drifting thing. I'm seeing that you're shooting a 150 to 600. I bet that's just going on a lot of tripod heads. Get something large, and it's going to look clunky, but man, is it a nice experience. Something that's tall enough for you as well. You can find that from several different manufacturers for certain. But those are the things I look for. And this is what I personally use every day. So, yeah.
Yeah. Cardinal Camera has a great selection of tripods from ProMaster, Three-Legged Thing. Peak Design makes a nice travel tripod. I've been very smitten with their travel tripod. I bought it, and it always lives in my suitcase now when I travel. So if I don't have the space or the room to carry a big heavy tripod, but if you can, get a tripod that your kids are going to fight over when you check out. Get one.
You want it to
get
last
a good one.
that long.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
And there are those out there. I noticed in one of your slides in your presentation, you showed a Gitzo, which is kind of the ultimate high-end tripod. And you don't have to necessarily spend that kind of money to get that kind of, or to get close to that quality. So, there's definitely choices out there. But like Joe said, again, a good heavy-duty ball head. And I think you'll see most pros are shooting with ball heads. Or pan and tilt heads if they do a lot of motion photography, rather than those clunky three-way 2 or 3 handle heads, because you'll hate your tripod after using those for a while.
Agreed. By the way, I just got a text from Kurt. I'm going to read it to everyone. 20% off of all tripods on sale this weekend. But if people mention that they took the class, I'll do 25% off. Hey, there you go. Kim asks, would you use APS-C or mirrorless for Christmas lights? Doesn't matter. You will be able to do exceptional work either way. Technically, you're getting more dynamic range at a full frame. So if you're like, oh, what should I choose if I have both in front of me? I'd pick up the full frame. But honestly, you're going to be super successful either way. It's not going to really change your life. Paul asks, are you going to add a card on tonight's topic to existing set? Paul, he's talking about my product. That is adding another card and redoing my packaging is on my to-do list for like Q1 to Q2 of 2024. So probably, but I don't have a timeline on that. And I might, when I do that, send just some of the added one out to some stores. And if folks have a previous set and they want the addition, just ask for it. But that's something I'm planning on. But that's sometime spring to summer next year. So it's not on my immediate to-do list. I'm actually designing 2 new products right now. So it's in the future. Dwight, thank you very much. I'll see you in the future. So Arthur asks, using full frame lens on APS-C body. I definitely want to hear, Jeff, your thoughts on this. But if you so basically the way it works is if you put an APS-C lens onto a full frame camera, you crop into the sensor. If you put a full frame lens onto an APS-C camera, you crop into the lens, and you're cropping into the resolving power of the lens. If there isn't another choice, or you're planning on upgrading in the future, or like, hey, I've got this, use it, is my thought. You do a full frame lens is sharper on a full frame camera than it is on an APS-C. Is it by an amount that should worry you? I don't necessarily think so. What are your thoughts, though?
Well, actually, it's a little bit lens dependent. Full frame lenses are going to be a little bigger and heavier, and also realize that you're going to have that crop factor. You're going to be magnifying the focal length by 1.5 or 1.6 times. So a lens that's measured at 28 millimeters on a full frame body will actually give you the equivalent angle of view of a 35 millimeter on a crop sensor. So you lose your wide angle. You do gain some telephoto, which can be beneficial if you're shooting wildlife, birds, things you can't physically get close to. So there are some advantages, and there's a lot more full frame lenses out there on the market than there are crop sensor lenses, as we discussed earlier. And if you're changing over, like say you're switching from a DSLR system to a mirrorless system, and you stay within the same brand, you can use their adapter, and all of your DSLR lenses will fit and function on your mirrorless camera. And kind of a cool thing, most all of the mirrorless cameras, if you have an APS-C lens, the camera will recognize that and crop your sensor automatically too. Plus, because the rear element is so much closer to the sensor, you have a lot less sensor cropping, putting APS-C lenses from a DSLR system via the adapter onto a mirrorless. So it's, you don't, if you're changing over and you go Nikon to Nikon, Canon to Canon, Sony to Sony, whatever, you're going to have a pretty easy time with the body makers' adapters. You don't have to immediately go out and buy a whole new bag full of lenses. You can use what you already have. Although they are doing cash for cameras at the Cardinal Camera sale too, so you can trade in and trade up.
Fair point. Drum asks, tripod versus monopod for travel. I think that monopods are more specified usage than a lot of people give them credit for. They will help you out with a lot of dawn and dusk landscape stuff. So sure, absolutely. But the real thing about a monopod is the ability to pick up and move. So they're really, I think they sing shooting sports, right? If I'm on one side of a field and then the play moves down the field, I can pick up and move. So it's that mobility. So I think about monopods as taking the weight and making a little bit of stability when I need to be mobile. And tripods are way better at the most stable way to shoot. So I'm personally more in favor of doing tripod for travel if we can fit it with luggage, etc. Otherwise, yeah, go monopod because it's more stable than hand holding. Also, something I forgot to mention, and it was mentioned up here, John mentioned it, is talking about tripods. He said, I like carbon fiber for weight and portability, but I don't want to break the bank with it. I just think it's fair. But carbon fiber is actually worth discussing in terms of tonight's class. And here's why. People commonly believe that, the primary purpose, because this is a carbon fiber tripod, this particular one is, that carbon fiber tripods exist in order to make the tripod lighter. That's actually not true. That's not the primary purpose at all. It does make it a little bit lighter, but this industry-wide, if you take a tripod, you make it out of high-grade aluminum and carbon fiber, the weight savings is 9 ounces. That's the average, which is not all that much. So why do we do it? Why are they a thing? They're a thing because we measure something in tripods called dampening. And that's how much, that's the dissipation of vibration. So if I have an object and one end of it vibrates, how much of that carries through to the other end? And as you can imagine, for shooting the images we're talking about tonight, where I'm on pavement, I might be shooting 8 seconds, I might walk around, a car might drive by. This actually matters. It matters quite a bit, right? And so it turns out that of all the materials we build stuff out of, the one that dampens vibrations the best is carbon fiber. That's actually the reason why we build guns and spaceships out of space shuttles out of the stuff. We don't build spaceships yet. Space shuttles out of the stuff. And so if I'm doing a long exposure shot, the material my tripod is made out of actually matters substantively. It really does. I have seen people with tripods get blurry images of the stuff we're talking about. And it's because of really one of only 3 things. The first is material of the tripod, right? So the worst is cheap plastic. Aluminum is definitely better, and carbon fiber is best as far as dampening goes. The second is they're using the center column, and the third is tightening your tripod, right? Actually having, got my Allen wrenches literally over here. Having your Allen wrenches like in your bag to be able to tighten the head of your tripod or the legs does actually come up. And they're meant to be tightened because, as Jeff said, you buy a good tripod, it's supposed to last you 20 to 30 years. A really good one should, right? We've all seen those really, really like, in camera terms, old like Bogan tripods that are decades old, and they're working fine because they're nice and tough, right? Kim asks, do you recommend using a shutter release for night photography? Either shutter release, which are dirt cheap, right? They're like $20 or something. They're great. I do use them. Or if you just set a 2-second timer, works awesome. 2-second timer is great. No problem. But I would do that in order to lessen vibration. Literally, you pushing the shutter release button down can vibrate and shake the camera. That's absolutely true. And so either shutter release or a timer is going to benefit you there 100%. All right. Any other questions before we let you go? Thanks so much for being here. I've had a great time, but more than anything, Jeff, I appreciate your time and I appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much, sir. It's
Thank you. Happy to be here. And
Yeah.
Patty wasn't sure because she was traveling between events that she was actually going to make it to the store on time. Turns out she did, but weeks ago, she knew she was going to be traveling from another event today to Cardinal, so she wasn't sure that she was actually going to make it. So I'm happy to be here and fill in. I'm Tamron Tech Jeff on the interwebs, on Facebook and Instagram, or you can follow the Tamron Tech team here also on Instagram and Facebook, and that's where you'll find where we're going to be in person or online. And we encourage you to follow us, but certainly happy to be here. And Tamron lenses. One more cool thing about Tamron, if I can just step up on my soapbox for a second, 6-year warranty on all of our new lenses, and that goes back to like 1982, I think. We've always put that 6-year warranty, and that's a Tamron USA warranty, which is now being extended to Canada, and because we are now Tamron Americas, out of our office in New York, we basically cover from the Arctic Circle to the far tip of Chile, and that warranty is the longest in the industry. And we know we build a great product. We stand behind it. We have a cool thing called the VIP Club too. If you are a Tamron fan and you own at least 3 Tamron lenses that you've bought since 2011, make sure that they are registered with Tamron. And in fact, this is the time of year to do it because we have an open window in December and January. That gets you webinars. It gets you a swag bag every year, some cool little premium items that people don't get unless they're part of the VIP club. And again, it only takes owning 3 lenses to join the VIP club, and then there are different tiers that get you more benefits. So definitely, we know we build a good product, we take care of our customers, and we give the little bit extra there with the VIP club too.
Very cool. Awesome. Recording will go up for this tomorrow. I normally have that up pretty early in my workday. I'm in Mountain Time, so that's typically more like 11 o'clock Eastern if you're on East Coast. But I'll get that up tomorrow. And thank you all for being here. I hope to see you in classes in 2024. Thank you so much to Tamron for being part of this event, and happy holidays, everybody. I wish you absolutely the best and a lovely season. All right. Take care, friends.